If history has taught us anything, it's that humans don't just punish, they innovate pain. Across centuries, entire empires have crafted punishments so cruel, they blur the line between justice and barbarity. Like strange and intriguing stuff? Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Because today, we're unveiling the most brutal punishments in human history. And trust me, some of these will haunt you. It starts with laughter. A tickling foot, a strange sensation. And then, the horror creeps in. According to historical accounts, in ancient Rome, there existed a punishment so deceptively gentle it bordered on mockery: the goat tickling method. The condemned would have their feet soaked in a brine, salt water, carefully prepared. Then, a goat was brought in. At first, its coarse tongue licking away at the salted soles was ridiculous, maybe even humorous. But as the licks continued and nerves began to fray, the sensation shifted. The mind, confused by the mix of pain and tickle, couldn't process it. It became unbearable. The salt inflamed the skin. The repetition broke the will. And soon, the prisoner wasn't laughing. They were pleading for it to stop. Some historians debate its frequency, but Roman sources do mention punishments of infamia meant to disgrace rather than dismember. The goat simply made sure you'd never forget. Imagine falling into darkness and never hitting bottom, at least not one you can escape. The Oubliette, from the French oublier, meaning to forget, wasn't a dungeon. It was a sentence to silence. Used in medieval Europe, beneath castles and fortresses, it was little more than a vertical shaft carved into stone. No stairs, no door, just a trapdoor above, and nothing below. Once inside, you could barely move, the walls pressed in, barely space to shift your weight. No light, no air, no food, no water. And as time dragged on, the real punishment began. The filth, no sanitation. The oubliette festered with vermin. The air turned sour and hope became a hallucination. No execution, but far worse sentence: thirst, hunger, disease, madness. Historically documented in places like France and England, these pits weren't built to hold you. They were built to make the world forget you ever existed. The worst part? It worked. Though largely a dramatic 18th century fabrication designed to look medieval, the terrifying concept of the Iron Maiden, a towering iron cabinet shaped like a woman, was designed to wound deliberately. Inside, rows of sharpened metal spikes lined the interior. Not long enough to be fatal, just long enough to wound and torment. When the door shut, it didn't slam. It closed with force, each spike pressed into place. Some say it was a myth, exaggerated by imagination. Others point to the 18th and 19th century displays in Germany as proof that something like it existed. Whether used as an actual instrument or a terrifying deterrent, one thing is certain: its design was no accident. Every angle, every spike, carefully positioned, not to kill quickly, but to punish slowly, spiritually, physically, and psychologically. They were intelligent and majestic, but unfortunately became instruments of brutal punishment when they were exploited for executions. In parts of South Asia and Southeast Asia, particularly India, Sri Lanka, and the Kingdom of Siam, elephants were used in formal punishments, often under royal or military authority. The practice, known in some accounts as gungarao, involved the use of specially trained elephants to carry out death sentences. Controlled by handlers using vocal commands or pointed tools, the animals would apply just enough force to either end a life swiftly or delay the process. In Sri Lanka, reports describe elephants fitted with blades on their tusks. In Siam, now Thailand, some were trained to lift the condemned before delivering the final crushing blow. It was a form of justice meant to demonstrate order and control. Historical records from as early as the 5th century BCE document this practice. It wasn't chaos, it was ceremonial, and it left a lasting impression, long after the footprints had faded. Hanging in cages, sometimes called gibbeting, was a punishment used across medieval Europe and into colonial times. The method was simple. The condemned was locked inside a metal cage and suspended from a wooden gallows in a public space. The intent, not just execution, but exposure. No shelter, no privacy, only open sky and open eyes. The cages were often too small to sit or lie down. Victims remained upright for days, exposed to the elements. Burning sun, pouring rain, freezing winds. With no food or water, death came slowly, through dehydration, starvation, or temperature extremes. And when death did arrive, the body wasn't removed. It stayed, sometimes for weeks, a grim warning to every passerby. Gibbets were common throughout the Middle Ages and into the 18th century, especially in England and France, where public deterrence was the goal. No rope, no blade, just a cage, and the long, open stare of judgment. The Scold's Bridle, also known as the brank, was a punishment device used primarily in Britain and parts of Europe between the 16th and 18th centuries. Its targets? Usually women accused of gossiping, arguing, or being disrespectful. The device looked like a metal mask or cage, placed over the head and locked at the back. Inside was the true cruelty. A flat metal plate, sometimes spiked, designed to silence the wearer. Speaking became impossible. Swallowing was difficult. Silence was survival. Some versions featured bells on top, ringing with every move, calling attention to the wearer. Others had exaggerated facial features, turning shame into theater. Those sentenced were paraded through town, jeered at by onlookers. It wasn't just punishment, it was a public humiliation. Though occasionally used on men, it overwhelmingly targeted women, reinforcing social control through fear and silence. Today, surviving examples sit behind glass in museums. But centuries ago, they broadcasted a simple message. Your words are dangerous, and we decide when they stop. At first glance, it didn't look threatening. A small pear-shaped device made of metal, oddly delicate in its design. But this was no fruit. It was the Pear of Anguish, a tool meant to silence, shame, and instill fear. According to historical accounts, the device featured a screw mechanism that, when turned, caused its segmented sides to expand outward. Its purpose? To cause internal pressure and pain, slowly and deliberately. It was reportedly used during the late Middle Ages and Inquisition-era Europe. Targets included those accused of heresy, blasphemy, or speaking against authority. Some accounts also mention its use against people accused of lying or causing public disorder. Whether or not it was commonly applied is still debated, but its threat was real enough to be recorded, and its presence alone could be enough to force a confession. Immurement, the act of sealing someone inside a wall or enclosed space, was used as a form of punishment across parts of medieval Europe and the ancient world. No chains, no executioner, just a wall, slowly closing around you. In many cases, the condemned were placed inside small chambers, sometimes just large enough to stand, with no exit, no light, and no airflow. Some were deliberately built into castles, monasteries, or city walls. Historical records link immurement to both religious and secular punishments. In some accounts, it was used for nuns who broke vows of chastity. In others, for traitors or enemies of the state. Once sealed in, the victims faced a slow and disorienting end, marked by isolation, thirst, and psychological collapse. There were no screams loud enough to pass through stone, only the memory that someone was still in there, waiting. It didn't break bones, but it shattered the mind, one drop at a time. Chinese water torture was a psychological method designed to inflict suffering without leaving visible scars. The technique involved restraining the person, often lying flat or seated, and letting a single drop of water fall at timed intervals onto the same spot on the forehead. That's it, just water. At first, it felt like nothing, a cold tap, a minor irritation. But over hours, or days, the rhythm turned unbearable. The brain began to anticipate the next drop with mounting anxiety, unable to escape, unable to adapt. Sleep became impossible. Time blurred. And eventually, the person psychologically broke. Although the origin is debated, the method was referenced in European writings from the 16th century, often attributed to ancient China, though concrete evidence of its use there is limited. True or not, the concept struck a nerve, because it proved one thing. Sometimes the quietest tortures scream the loudest. It wasn't made for sitting. It was made to punish, slowly and completely. The iron chair, used in parts of Europe for centuries, was a torture device covered with hundreds of sharp metal spikes. The seat, the backrest, the armrests, even the footrest, all bristled with cold, unrelenting points. A person would be forced to sit down, carefully, then strapped in, not to prevent escape, but to guarantee stillness. In some versions, a stove or fire was placed beneath the chair, heating the metal until it glowed. Victims endured not only the pressure of the spikes, but also the torment of heat rising beneath them. According to 19th century reports and preserved examples, the iron chair was used both as a punishment and an interrogation tool. Some victims were forced to remain in place for hours, even days, until exhaustion or infection set in. It wasn't a fast punishment, it wasn't a clean one, but it sent a message. Pain can have structure. The chair didn't move, and neither could you. Poena Cullei, Latin for punishment of the sack, was Rome's response to one of the gravest crimes imaginable: parricide, the act of killing one's own parent. The sentence was more than execution. It was a ritual, meant to erase the person not just from life, but from memory. Here's how it worked. The condemned was beaten, then sewn into a large leather sack, not alone, but with a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey. Why those animals? Historians believe they symbolized chaos, betrayal, and divine wrath. Each creature brought its own unpredictable danger. And then, the sack, full of frantic creatures, was thrown into a river or the sea. No grave, no funeral, no body. The fate of the condemned person sealed inside the sack was inevitably grim, as they faced potential death by snakebite, the brute force of a primate, or suffocation from drowning. This punishment appears in Roman legal texts from the 1st to 3rd centuries CE, and was briefly revived in late antiquity and the Byzantine period. It wasn't just about death, it was about removal, from land, from lineage, from history itself. Because for the Romans, killing your parent didn't just sever blood, it severed your right to exist. Invented during the reign of Henry VIII, the Scavenger's daughter was a remarkable punishment device designed to compress the body, leading to great physical discomfort. Made of iron and shaped like a hinged frame, the device enclosed the victim's head, hands, and legs. They were forced into a crouched position, then the frame was tightened. With each crank, pressure increased, joints compressed. Pain radiated from within, not from wounds, but from the body fighting its own shape. Named ironically, possibly reflecting the idea that it slowly extracted the person's endurance. The device served as both punishment and psychological warfare. Used in the Tower of London, it was intended to extract confessions or send a message to others. Few people remember it today, but in its time, it left victims permanently damaged, if they survived at all. It was polished bronze, hollow, shaped like a bull. But once the door slammed shut, it became something else entirely. The Brazen Bull is one of the most infamous execution devices from ancient Greece. Allegedly created in the 6th century BC under the tyrant Phalaris of Acragas in modern-day Sicily. The condemned were placed inside the metal sculpture. Then a fire was lit beneath it. But there's more. Engineers designed an acoustic system within the bull. Tubes and chambers that converted the victim's cries into sounds resembling a bellowing bull. From the outside, it wasn't screaming, it was roaring. The story gets darker. Legend has it the device's inventor, Perillos, was the first to test it, at the tyrant's Phalaris command. Some historians debate how widely it was used, or whether the accounts were mythologized over time, but multiple ancient sources mention its chilling design. Whether real or mythologized, its legacy is clear. The Brazen Bull didn't just end life, it turned suffering into performance. The The sea was calm, but beneath it, the punishment was waiting. Keelhauling was a naval execution method used between the 17th and 18th centuries, particularly by the Dutch Navy. Its name says it all. The victim was hauled under the keel, the underside of the ship, dragged from one side to the other beneath the hull. But this wasn't a quick plunge. The ship's bottom was encrusted with sharp barnacles and rusted metal. As the person was pulled across, their bodies scraped against the rough hull with every inch. Weighted ropes ensured they didn't float. Some didn't resurface at all. Historical accounts show its primary goal was not death, at least not immediately. Victims were sometimes given intervals to recover between passes, though recovery is a generous word. By the early 18th century, the British banned it, citing extreme cruelty. The Dutch followed soon after. No sword, no bullet, just salt water and barnacles writing stories of pain across the victim's body. The Heretic's fork was a simple device, but its impact was devastating. Used during the Inquisition and other periods of religious persecution, it was designed not to end life, but to control it. The device featured two metal prongs at each end, connected by a central strap. One set of spikes pointed upward beneath the chin, the other downward into the chest. It was fastened tightly around the neck, forcing the wearer to remain perfectly still. Any movement, even to speak, meant immediate pain. Historical records suggest it was used to extract confessions, or silence those who had already confessed. Victims had to stand for hours, sometimes days, without rest. Every breath monitored by pain. Unlike other tortures, there were no flames, no blood. Just the slow decay of strength and will. This was no ordinary wheel. It didn't turn for travel, it turned for torment. Known as the breaking wheel, this brutal execution method was used across Europe from the Middle Ages into the 18th century. It was reserved for the most serious crimes and attended by large crowds. Victims of this punishment faced two grim fates, being broken by the wheel or broken upon it. The condemned was tied to a large wooden wheel, limbs stretched outward. Then, with methodical precision, the executioner used an iron rod or hammer to hit the victim, one strike at a time. Sometimes, the wheel was mounted vertically, displaying the condemned as a public warning. Other times, fires were lit beneath to make the punishment even more severe. The pain wasn't just intense, it was prolonged. Victims could survive for hours, even days. Historical records confirm its use throughout Germany, France, and Eastern Europe. And after death, the condemned were often left on display, a haunting reminder of what defiance could cost. The message was clear. You don't just die for your crimes, you're broken for them. The boiling pot was used as a form of execution in parts of Europe between the 12th and 18th centuries, particularly in England and France. It wasn't always water. Sometimes it was oil, or molten lead, or pitch. The condemned was either dropped directly into the boiling liquid, or lowered slowly by rope. The pain was unimaginable, but that was the point. In some accounts, the process was deliberately gradual, prolonging the suffering to make the punishment visible. This method was often reserved for the most serious crimes: treason, forgery, or witchcraft. Records show it was used under the reign of Henry VIII, notably against those who tampered with currency, seen as a direct betrayal of the crown. The final message was seared into memory: defy the law, and the law will deliver an unbearable punishment. Scaphism was an ancient Persian execution method, recorded by Greek historians around 500 BCE. This ancient form of torture involved victims being consumed by insects and exposed to the elements, suffering slowly as nature took its course. The victim was confined between two narrow boats or hollowed logs, one on top, one below, leaving only the head, hands, and feet exposed. Then came the real horror. They were force-fed a mixture of milk and honey, again and again, their bodies smeared with the same, attracting insects under the blazing sun. Victims suffered under a relentless swarm of insect bites and vermin. Each morning, attendants would return to force-feed more, not to nourish, but to prolong the torment. While the bites were painful, Victims typically succumb to exposure and infection rather than just the insect bites. Some historians debate the full accuracy of these accounts, but they agree on one thing: it was designed to be remembered. It looked like a table, but it was anything but restful. The rack is one of the most notorious torture devices in European history, used from ancient Greece through the Middle Ages and beyond. Its design was brutally simple: a wooden frame, rollers at each end, and chains to bind the wrists and ankles. Once secured, the victim was stretched slowly. Each turn of the rollers pulled the limbs farther apart. Joints were strained to the breaking point, leaving limbs useless and movement impossible. It wasn't just the pain, it was the anticipation. Every click of the mechanism promised more damage. Historical records place the rack in royal prisons, castles, and inquisitorial courts. Legends even mention Herostratus as an early victim of the rack, executed for burning down the Temple of Artemis in the 4th century BCE. Often, the rack wasn't used as an execution method, but to extract confessions, to make a person say anything to make it stop. Survivors were left with lifelong disabilities. Some never walked again. Others couldn't even hold a spoon. The rack didn't ask questions. It just pulled answers out, one stretch at a time. The Strappado was a favored method of interrogation during the Middle Ages and Renaissance, particularly by inquisitors across Europe. At first glance, it looked almost too simple. The victim's hands were tied behind their back, and a rope was looped over a high beam or pulley. Then, they were lifted. Slowly. Deliberately. The body weight alone was enough to cause significant physical strain, especially in the arms and shoulders. But the real cruelty came next. They were dropped, not to the ground, but partway. A sudden jolt midair, creating a violent shock through the body. Sometimes, this process was repeated, again and again. The repeated movements caused increasing physical exhaustion. Victims were often left dangling for hours, unable to sit, unable to rest. Fatigue radiated through the body, movement became impossible, breathing difficult. Records from inquisitorial manuals and trial transcripts describe it as a non-lethal form of persuasion. But the damage was lasting, if not fatal. The Strappado let the victim's own body become the weapon against himself. The Judas Cradle was a torture device often associated with the Spanish Inquisition, though its actual use is widely disputed by historians. Devised to punish heretics, dissenters, and the accused. Its structure was deceptively simple. A wooden pyramid mounted on legs, resembling a stool. The condemned was suspended by ropes, wrists, and ankles bound. Slowly, they were lowered onto the point of the pyramid. The descent was deliberate, the pressure overwhelming. The weight of the body became the executioner. To increase the torment, weights were sometimes added, not to kill faster, but to intensify the suffering. Victims could remain suspended for hours, struggling not to move, not to fall further. Practitioners during the Inquisition strangely considered it humane compared to fire or the wheel. But survivors, if there were any, left with far more than wounds. It was not just about pain, it was about shame. The Judas Cradle didn't scream. It waited, patiently, for the body to fail. The victims weren't tied down, they were hung upside down. That's how sawing in half began, not at the neck, but at the legs. Some accounts claim its use in parts of the Middle East, Asia, and Europe throughout history. The victim was suspended by the ankles, head downward. Why? Because gravity kept the head supplied with blood, prolonging consciousness. Then with a long, heavy saw, operated by two people, the act began. Though accounts vary, historical records trace its use back to ancient Persia and parts of China. It also appears in European texts during the Inquisition and in tales of tyrants eager to send a message. This wasn't just punishment, it was performance designed to silence entire villages. The head crusher was a terrifying invention often claimed to be a medieval interrogation device. Simple in design, savage in effect. While historians debate its genuine historical use, the concept is clear. The victim's chin rested on a metal bar. Their head was pressed beneath a cap, A screw at the top connected the two, and when turned, pressure increased, gradually causing intense discomfort, especially in the jaw and face. It wasn't designed for execution, not immediately. Its purpose was confession, submission, obedience. Records show its use in parts of Europe during the Inquisition and other legal proceedings where silence was unacceptable. There were no flames, no blades, just the slow mechanical rhythm of pressure building, until resistance turned into submission. White torture, also known as sensory deprivation, is one of the most psychologically devastating punishments ever documented. Unlike medieval methods, this modern technique targets not the body, but the mind. Victims are placed in small, entirely white rooms. No windows, no clocks, no voices. Even their clothing and food lack color. The artificial lights stay on 24/7. There's no way to tell day from night. No stimulation, no social interactions, and all ambient sounds or distractions are minimized. This method disrupts mental balance by limiting sensory perception and is considered one of the most severe forms of mental stress. Sleep becomes impossible. Thoughts begin to spiral. The person lacks any form of distraction like conversations, sounds, or colors, which can cause feelings of alienation or disorientation. This method has been referenced in reports from political prisons and intelligence operations, where interrogation turns inward, wearing down the psyche instead of the body. There are no physical scars when it's over, just confusion, disorientation, emotional collapse. The blood eagle is one of the most chilling punishments described in ancient Norse sagas. According to legends, it was used by the Vikings in the Middle Ages. Its purpose? To send a warning so horrifying, it would echo across generations. Here's how it's told. The condemned, often a traitor or enemy, was bound in a kneeling or lying position. Then, according to the tales, cuts were made along the back to create wing-like shapes, resembling an eagle's spread wings. Some accounts claim the victim was kept alive through the process, breathing until the very end. Others suggest the entire ritual was more symbolic than literal, a blend of myth, metaphor, and cultural memory. The eagle itself carried deep meaning in Norse mythology, a symbol of power, battle, and the soul's passage to the afterlife. Historians still debate whether the blood eagle was ever truly performed, or whether it was poetic exaggeration from Viking skalds. But either way, the image endured. Because this wasn't just about death. It was about transformation, turning betrayal into punishment. Lingchi, known as death by 1,000 cuts, was one of Imperial China's most infamous execution methods. Reserved for the gravest crimes, high treason, parricide, or murder of one's master. It served as a public warning, carried out in open squares to discourage others from committing these acts. The condemned was tied to a wooden frame in a public space. Then the executioner began. One cut, then another, then another. The execution was slow and methodical with the goal of inflicting prolonged pain and shame. Starting with non-lethal areas, arms, thighs, shoulders, the crowd watched as the body diminished piece by piece. The process occurred step by step with a person's consciousness typically remaining intact for much of the procedure. Contrary to popular myth, Lingchi wasn't meant to prolong life for days. Most victims perished within minutes. It was outlawed in 1905, its final use marking the end of a dynasty. Impaling, most famously used by Vlad the Impaler, the 15th century ruler of Wallachia, was one of history's most chilling punishments. Vlad saw it as a means to instill fear, maintain control, and deter potential threats. He's famous for his cruel and sadistic methods of punishment, with his favorite execution method being impalement. The method was as brutal as it was deliberate. A sharpened wooden stake was driven into the victim's body, often through the lower torso, and carefully positioned to avoid vital organs. Why? So the victim would stay alive, for hours, sometimes days. The body was hoisted vertically to display the victim's suffering. Vlad's use of impalement was not limited to foreign enemies, but also extended to domestic adversaries and even his own people. And when the Ottomans invaded, they found thousands of impaled victims lining the roads. This wasn't legend. Historical records from both sides describe the horror in grim detail. It was psychological warfare, a warning to enemies and traitors alike. This land defends itself with terror. Vlad's legacy became the seed for Dracula. But the truth was far more terrifying than fiction. Because of all these methods, this is the one everyone would do anything to avoid. Which one of these punishments haunted you the most? Tell me in the comments. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more intriguing videos, click one on the screen or dive deeper into the channel. Thanks for watching. Until next time.